Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So these past few weeks, we've been talking about the 5 khandhas or aggregates. And last week we spoke about Sankhara, but it was so cold that I think most of us weren't actually able to listen that much. At least I wasn't able to speak that well. And I thought since we're a bit warmer now, it might be worth giving it one more go. It's also the most complicated one, so I think it'd be helpful for me to try to think about again as well. And we began this discussion of the aggregates by speaking about the essential movement, or one of the essential movements in the Buddhist path, which is the movement from the energy of fire and flame to that of light and spaciousness. And this is most beautifully displayed in the Buddha's third seminal discourse, the Adita Pariyaya Sutta, the fire sermon. And it's one of the most impressive examples of the Buddha's skill as a teacher. At the time, a term called tapas, or spiritual heat, was considered the supreme goal or means by which one purified oneself. And this spiritual heat was the prime motive and means of a large group of ascetics called the fire worshippers. And this group, the fire worshippers, tended to be very bound to one spot where they held their sacred fires. And in the case of this specific group, they were in a river valley. So what the Buddha first did was change everything on them. He brought them to a hill named Gayasise and moved them from their usual haunt of the river valley. He then pointed to a wildfire in the distance and began by speaking about how our entire experience is burning with the flames of fire, of greed, hatred, and delusion. And in place of these tainted and corrupting fires, he pointed to the energy of light. Ajahn Kovilo asked Bhikkhu Bodhi several weeks ago how he decided the way that he wanted to translate Buddha. And while the verb bhuj, which is the root of Buddha, is actually more accurately translated in some ways as to awaken, Bhikkhu Bodhi nonetheless just chose to translate the term as enlightenment, or the Buddha as the enlightened one. Because time and again, through the suttas, you see the imagery of light. And the awakened mind, or the higher consciousness, or states of consciousness, are compared to light that lands on nothing. So in the Buddha's framework, fire was looked at as a bound thing, trapped by its fuel, agitated and exhausting that which it fed on. Light was conceived as the fire god Agi, or the fire energy that pervaded all. So our quintessential movement in this practice might be looked at as a movement away from agitation and feeding towards a cool, glowing light. And the khandhas, a Pali term translated as aggregate or mass, can be looked at as heaps of flame. These 5 loci of identity, the form, which is our body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness, are the things we take as me and mine and identify with and bind ourselves to. And we reach again and again into our experience, hoping to find a solid, but we're reaching into a liquid, so we come up with nothing. And when these things break, our hearts break. So how do we take these 5 burning aggregates, what Bhikkhu, or what Ajahn Nisabho describes as 5 loads of bricks? How do we take these from our back and lay them on the ground as a path towards awakening? How do we use this life and this experience and this body and this flawed personality and these flawed beings that we are? How do we use these in the service of finding a refuge that is true and transcendent and immutable? How do we turn ourselves into true servants of the world and of others? So, the Buddha gave 5 analogies for the khandhas. Form, the body, he said, was like a lump of foam. And I think this can be thought of or looked at as in the context of the fact that form, our bodies, appear solid, but they fade, and they're actually aggregates of many different small bubbles or pieces. Feeling, he compared to the ripples on water after a raindrop hits. And you can think of this as after contact with an experience or sensory impression, the ripples of feeling, pleasant, painful, or neutral, which spread. Perception he compared to a mirage. It's constantly manifesting in front of us, and we chase after these things our entire lives, hoping to drink. Sankhara he compared, or mental formations, to a plantain tree, a banana tree. You unwrap the sapwood again and again, but find no heartwood. It's a bit like an onion for us Westerners. And consciousness he compared to a magician at a crossroads. It exists at the crossroads of all sensory impression and summons something that seems solid. And Bhikkhu Analayo has a great way of looking at the khandhas too. Form, he says, tells you where you are. Feeling tells you how you are. Perception tells you what you're experiencing. Sankhara tells you why you act. And consciousness tells you whereby you experience. The quintessential element of Sankara is intention. Every one of the other khandhas are the fruits of kama. It's what comes after and arises. But Sankara is different. It creates kama. And it's the most difficult Pali term, perhaps, apart from maybe nibbana or dukkha, to translate. And one translation is formations, volitional formations. Ajahn Sona translates it as emotions and decisions. Ajahn Sucitto, I think very helpfully, translates it as programs. And in the context of the khandhas, these can be looked at as the programs that we run through our lives, how we operate. And these programs bend to their will and in service of their aims, every one of the other khandhas. They are the seed of intention that you immerse into a supersaturated solution and a crystal forms. We come and wake up in the day grumpy and hoping to find something to be angry at. And sure enough, soon the sensory impression of your loved one leaving their dish on the table combines with a feeling of tightness in the chest, combines with the memory of how they did that 4 days last week, combines with, and so on and so forth. And soon you have a whole morning created. And this is program, this is Sankhara. It's a snowball effect, all predicated on the seed of intention. Ajahn Sucitto talks about how the chitta, what we refer to as the mind heart in Buddhism, is a bit like the storehouse, or how do you put it? A storehouse of intention and impression. In Buddhism, we have two words for mind. We have manas, which is likened to the fingers. It's intellect, attention, and it grasps objects and presses them to the palm. The palm is chitta, or the heart. And the chitta is not of the sense world. It's not ever able to be satisfied by the sense world. And yet, because it is hungry and suffering, it sends out the manas, the fingers, to find something and bring it back in hopes that it will be satisfied. It's like the blind boss in the office sending out his secretary for a cup of coffee again and again and again, and they always get the order wrong. So chitta is hungry, and it sends out the intellect to find something to satisfy it, a sense of affirmation, something satiating, something to be angry at, anything in line with its intention. And the tragedy is that it never, because it is not a creature of the sense world, can be satisfied by that. It is always hungry and increasingly frantic and starving. So, Ajahn Sucitto reflected then that the only reason to move into duality then, for the chitta to move out into the world, is not with a sense of feeding, which is the relationship of the flame to the log, upadana, attachment, feeding, craving, but rather with a sense of blessing. Can we move into the world with a sense of, may this be well? Because why else would you move out into the world except with that intention? And this is the other quintessential change in our relationship to the world on this path. Not just from heaviness to lightness, from flame to light, but also from feeding to blessing. And if our core intention moving into the world time and again is to bless the world, to give, then that core intention forms the seed which we place into the supersaturated solution of our lives and experience, and which then gathers around it everything, every one of the other khandhas, into something truly beautiful. Because we cannot dismantle Sankara right away. We have to cultivate skillful Sankara formations in service of ourselves and of the path. Usually for most of us in our lives, these Sankara are unintentional, matted balls of yarn, fluff. It's like the lint ball in the drying machine after several weeks. And then when it catches on fire, which I think also does happen occasionally, maybe that's the most accurate metaphor. And we see how these Sankara, these ways of acting with others, these personality modes, how we walk into a room and immediately try to enact the usual routine that we have, or the way of interacting with a group that we know. We're the extrovert, we're the clown, we're the wallflower. And even if we know that's not the skillful way to be, even if we know it's wound up with great suffering for us, it's all we know. And so we have no way of stepping back from it. And over the years and decades, those sankharas crystallize. And even the Sankara of how we perceive the world becomes crystallized. And the intimate subtlety and poignancy of experience fades, and we find ourselves in Plato's cave looking at shadows. The loved one is no longer a complex creature and mystery, but rather a name and an impression and a feeling and something to affirm me or disrupt me. And over the years, these modes of perception can crust over any chance we have of seeing beauty. They did a famous experiment where Joshua Bell, one of the foremost violinists in the world, who'd been the previous night playing in Carnegie Hall or some other famous venue, they placed him with his $100,000 Stradivarius in a New York subway and had him busk. And everyone walked by, except for maybe one or two people, and the children. Time and again, the children tried to stop their parents and were dragged on. And I think if we really looked at what that experiment meant, then it would stop us in our tracks. What sort of beauty is right there under our noses in our relationship, in our mornings, in our days, in our hearts, that we walk past again and again because we have our schedule and our programs and our ways of perceiving the world. By the time we're 20 or 30, it can be as if we're living life through a plane of plexiglass. And that's a tragedy with no less gravity for its slowness in manifesting. And when the Buddha said that the mindless were as if dead already, I think that's what he was looking to, was the fact that without mindfulness, all we are is this collection of programs. We are automatons interacting with one another, and there's no seed of life because the chitta is buried too deep underneath that crust and that weave. In Vedic language, Sankara also meant something else. It meant sacrament or ritual. So how do we take these knotted balls of yarn, these coarse modes of perception, and slowly unwind them and replace them with ritual that is beautiful and freeing? Sacrament and ritual are composed of carefully choreographed action with one another. And in Vedic terms, the centerpiece of each was a flame. So not only do we create and care for the conditions of these sankhara which we're creating in our lives, but the centerpiece of each is a flame which burns any form into void. And in a sense, even as we're creating the sankhara, we're learning to step back from them and see them as at their heart and core empty. And so you're able to hold them lightly. And this is the beauty of the enlightened masters, is they could move so agile, in such an agile way between different modes of personality, depending on what was skillful, without being attached to any. There's stories of Ajahn Chah just admonishing a monk over a transgression and just railing against him. And a senior Western monk was giving him a back rub at the time and noticed no tension in his body. And then the next second, a group of lay people came to pay respects, and Ajahn Chah suddenly completely shifted with no change in his body's hold or tension and started joking with those who had come. And this is the potential. If we learn to use these personalities in Sankhara skillfully and take a little step back, is then we can choose to hold them and bring them up. But in the words of Ajahn Chah, we hold them lightly and we can put them down, and we're not bound to them. We are their masters and no longer their servants. In daily life, what this means, or can mean, is that we use sacrament and ritual explicitly. We use these formations in our lives, these conventions, these programs externally to hold us and to direct us on the path. In our culture, we understand that internal inclination gives rise to external action. We like someone, so we give them something. But what we've forgotten is the power of ritual lies in the fact that external action changes internal inclination. So, when you get up right in the morning, if the first thing you do is you bow, and if you have faith in the Buddha, then you bow to that. And if you have faith in, if you aren't ready to bow to a Buddha image, then maybe bow to something else that symbolizes your highest aspirations. And if the last thing you do at the evening is you bow, that affects you after days and months and years of doing it. If you create a little shrine in your house where you can place an image, that affects you over time. As Ajahn Pasana said, the props are important. If you need to find a mala to wear around your wrist, then you do that. Several weeks ago, we went down and paid respects to Longpo Pasano at the Pacific Hermitage. And a traditional thing we do as monastics, whenever we meet a senior Ajahn, is we ask for forgiveness. We humble ourselves, and through them we ask for any forgiveness for any transgression we've made towards the Dhamma. And there's always something. And can we make it a habit to ask those around us for forgiveness? Every 2 weeks, as monks, we have to confess our transgressions to another monastic. And this is very useful, is have a good friend who you can check in with once or twice a week, or once every 2 weeks, and just say what you did that maybe you wish you hadn't, or what your aspirations are for the next. These are the rituals and programs, the Sankara, we can create in our lives as a whole to bind us to this path. And I've spoken also about how the aspect of adhitthana, which means determination in Pali, can be used in the same way. You have a good friend and you make a determination to perhaps meditate a certain number of minutes 6 days out of the week, or to not partake of something you know you should be stepping back from. And if you transgress, you tell them. Or you give them a check written to the political party you really don't like, and you say that if you've transgressed, then they should mail it. And this is effective. The other Sankhara that the Buddha created, the other structure for lay people that I don't think is used nearly enough, is the Uposatha day, a Sabbath day. And when he was reflecting on the 8 precepts which people traditionally hold during that day, the reflection one is supposed to bring to mind is, the noble ones spend their entire lives not killing. Why don't I, for a day, not kill? The noble ones, for their entire lives, do not steal. Why don't I, for a single day, not steal? And so on. And the 8 precepts, in addition to the normal 5 precepts, strengthen the 3rd precept to no sexual misconduct. And they add on the admonition or the encouragement to step back from all entertainment. So for one day, can the phone be turned off? Can we not bring up Netflix? Can we listen to Dhamma talks instead? And And just to let our friends know that that's what we are going to do. Not eating after noon is another aspect. If you want to forego dinner or have a simple dinner instead, just to free up that time and make sure the body and mind are light by evening. And the other one I always like to mention is the Saraniya practice held in Sri Lanka, where you do not eat until you have given. And this is better done for dinner in the West, but can you make it a practice every day or many times a week of giving food to another? And then internally, the Sankhara in meditation and how we use those mental formations in the service of the path is simultaneously a process of creating skillful ones, but also of unwinding them more and more. So we begin. One useful way of looking at practice is as a tiered system, where different practices are appropriate depending on how subtle our mind is at that time. And coarse Sankara are helpful in that they can assist us in every state of mind. So mantra meditation is one of the most coarse but robust and reliable of these methods. So if you have a word, Buddho, which means awakened, or something else that works for you, love, another syllable or word, can you keep it in your mind? Can you repeat it as you walk? You can whisper it, you can chant it to a set of mala beads, and you can bring it into your meditation. And this is a coarse Sankara, but it's robust and it'll be there whenever you need it. But then, and similarly at the beginning of the Anapanasati Sutta, the mindfulness of breathing discourse, the admonition to look to your breath, to track its length, the coarse wind at the nostrils. This is actually a fairly coarse Sankara, it's changing. And then as the meditation deepens, with that intention towards awakening, can you unwind that Sankara just a little bit? So maybe you find that you're repeating the mantra less often. You just drop it into the meditation and let it echo for a time. If you've developed the sound of silence, the nada sound, that's an extremely powerful meditation object because it lacks many of the other qualities of Sankara. It's subtle. The intention is receptive in a sense to listen. It's a subtle hissing in the ears, and it's steady and unchanging. So if you haven't yet found the sound of silence, you can try looking for it right when you wake up, or go and into a dark room, plug your ears, immerse yourself under some water, and see if you can hear it then, and then track it little by little through the day. And similarly, the beauty of, in a sense, at these stages of meditation, as you're moving, say, up the steps of the Anapanasati Sutta, you're moving from the core sensation of the breath to a wide field of awareness of the whole body, to a sense of refreshment and piti, and then sukha arising, and then to just the sensation of the mind. And these are more and more refined Sankara, sacrament. But you can also look to use Sankara in the service of dismantling itself. So when you use wisdom practice or vipassana, when you look at your experience and the programs in your life that dominate your life as impermanent, changeable, bound with suffering, then you can slowly watch them dismantle. Asking yourself questions is another good way to do this, because although you're using Sankara for the sake of the question, what responds to it is a natural response from the chitta itself and the body that's far less bound up with intention. And it's true that at the beginning, some of our meditation really does depend on these these other elements which form around Sankhara. Say we look to the sensation of the breath and a sense of refreshment, piti, rapture arises. We're invoking or nourishing ourselves with a Sankhara that's bound up with feeling, with intention, with consciousness. And this is nourishing to an extent. But the citta isn't nourished by the senses in the same way. And so sometimes the most powerful and most refined food we can give the citta is that Sankhara which is almost explicitly and entirely intention itself. And this would include, to some extent, the Brahma Viharas, the boundless abodes, love, compassion, mudita, equanimity. And this is truly robust food for the heart. And it's not dependent on others, and it's not dependent on the external world, and it's not fragile. These sorts of happiness, which is a very pure form of Sankhara, because it's almost entirely just the seed of intention, although it invokes all sorts of good other effects, like a warmth in the body, a good feeling, a brightening of the awareness, but its core is intention still. And these sorts of happiness are referred to in Buddhism as niramisa sukha, transcendent or spiritual happiness, the happiness of being blameless, the happiness of loving kindness, of concentration. And in the terms of the metaphor of the hand and manas, samadhi, or unification of mind, is compared to, instead of manas being sent out to grab objects and press it into the palm, which never satisfies the citta. Instead, all aspects of the mind are brought into the palm and held there by awareness, the thumb, and one unified point is created. The mind is contained in and of itself. So maybe the metaphor there is the boss and his secretary finally sitting down and actually drinking their coffee together and talking or something. I think our metaphors today have moved from flame to banana trees to secretary and bosses and something else, onions. Such is the nature of trying to talk about Sankhara. So what we're doing is we're acknowledging that our life is tied up and framed by formations in Sankhara, no matter what. We have our rituals. We all worship something. The shrine in the house is taken up by the big screen TV. We watch football games and movies, which are very strange things and very much like religious ritual if you think about it. So what we're doing is we're creating our lives and the Sankhara in our lives as sacrament, as ceremony. We're understanding that what we are pointing ourselves towards is not easy to keep an eye on. And so we time and again surround ourselves with the people and the forms and the ritual and the programs which will direct us and keep us on this path. And we do it intentionally and carefully. And we forgive ourselves when we fail, because we will. And even as we do this and build up the props and friendships which will support us on this path, we simultaneously keep our eye on that fire at the center of that sacrament that dissolves form into nothing. And that even as we build these various forms, we, through seeing how they operate in meditation, through seeing how they are changeable, through seeing how they arise by conditions and cease according to conditions, we begin to release our grip on them. And similarly, as we step deeper and deeper into the stream of Dhamma, as our faith grows, then we can release our white-knuckled grip on those formations and those formations of self, because we are resting in something far deeper, that intuitive awareness that points us through, on a pure path through any situation, that lets us keep our hand carefully on that thin thread of Dhamma. Ajahn Sucitto talks about how of the 3 fetters that drop at stream entry, the first encounter with the awakened state, the 2 that we frequently point to, the dropping of self-view, Sakkaya Ditthi, is the most important, and the others seem secondary. But he points to the fact that that dropping of self-view is predicated as well on the dropping of doubt. Because only when we've gained a faith in something deeper, that intuitive feel of how the Dhamma guides us, can we step away from those knotted, self-referential views of ourself and attachment, which are the only way we've had heretofore to orient and guide us. In the shadow of that supersaturated solutions crystal is where the self forms, and the sense of self. It forms in the shadow of desire. So when we dismantle all this, even that sense lightens. I asked a nun who I'm good friends with, I've spoken about her, a Catholic nun, what had kept her in robes, and she said after a time, the voice of God became the most important thing in her life. And we don't really have a complete analogy in Buddhism to this language, yet I think that intuitive faith, sense of the Dhamma, and the faith that we can trust in this path and these words really does let us feel held and guided and release our grip and dependence and relationship of feeding on all of these other aspects. And then we can slowly, and when appropriate, watch them fade. The articulation of right view in Buddhism is couched as both the Four Noble Truths and an acknowledgement of our karmic situation. There is mother and father. There is the fruits of good and bad action. So it's an acknowledgement that we simultaneously must keep an eye on the transcendent wisdom and on the Four Noble Truths, and also must occupy this world with care and dedication and a sense of blessing. So even as we cultivate our life as a sacrament, as a ceremony, we also step away and lighten our grip on it and approach transcendent wisdom. And then we can become servants of one another, and we can reach through that web of Sankhara and see something truly bright and lasting. So I wish you all the best on that path.
And I wasn't sure what that meant, so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
So the question is, the questioner had heard something about the encouragement to have mindfulness of mind and wasn't sure exactly what that meant, so perhaps to speak to it a little. So the Buddha divided up the pie in many different ways, depending on what sort of, and you can take up any of the frameworks at different times. The two frameworks which are always appropriate to take up are the Four Noble Truths and the Four Right Efforts. The framework about mindfulness of mind is fitted into another really powerful framework to look at experience through, which is the four foundations of mindfulness. Mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of Dhamma or Dhamma categories, which is sort of how you overlay the Dhamma teachings onto your experience and parse out mental qualities into positive and negative. In the Satipatthana Sutta, mindfulness of mind is described as looking at sort of the general feel of the mind, or almost the mood might be the right term. So how it says is one sees a contracted mind as contracted, distracted mind as distracted, exalted, unexalted, surpassed, unsurpassed, concentrated, not concentrated, etc. And I think what this can, be looked at a little bit as is if the experience we are impacted by day to day is likened to a projection on a movie screen, then the mind is almost the backdrop upon which the image is projected. So if it's dark or warped, then it warps the images on it. And as long as we're fixated on the passing forms, then we miss the underlying tenor of the mind, which is affecting all of them. And that's a problem. So I think we've all had the experience of going through a morning and just everyone's really annoying, and then you realize, a few hours in that you didn't sleep well last night, or you didn't actually have breakfast, and suddenly you understand that the mind state below the passing thoughts is the real salient point, and there's a huge release in that, and understanding that, just seeing the conditions behind it, in understanding that the movie screen itself is warped, so every image that comes onto it will be warped as well. It's hard to see past the images. So this is one of the beauties of refining meditative practice, is in the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta, the steps lead up through, say, becoming sensitive to rapture, to pleasure, which is the steps that correspond to mindfulness of feeling. But then the third tetrad, the third set of 4 steps in this sutta, are one becomes sensitive to the mind, gladdens the mind, concentrates the mind, liberates the mind. But you only reach that stage after generally quieting and calming all that mental chatter, to the point where it's as if suddenly the projector's off and you can see the backdrop very clearly. And then you have a chance to, go up to the backdrop and kind of smooth out the issues and drop in a little metta, or just smooth it with the breath. And the whole tenor of the backdrop can become shifted. And then when the movie projector inevitably begins to churn again, the movie is a lot nicer. It turns into like a romantic comedy or something. I don't know what your life's like, but it's not, a horror movie anymore. Yes, and it's, maybe that's enough for now. It can be looked at a bit as the mood, and it can be very useful to look to at times.
He or she asks, please explain more about the nada sound.
Vandana Lal, okay. The question is, one would like to hear a bit more about the nada sound. So I recently learned that this is a practice that Ajahn Nisabho discovered when he moved to England. And if you've ever been to Thailand, it's noisy. There's cicadas, which really annoyingly actually have the exact same pitch as the nada sound. So I always had to wear earplugs when I was there. But when Ajahn Sumedho moved to England, the quiet took him by surprise, and he began to notice a vague hiss or ringing below the soundscape of his auditory awareness. And he began to cultivate it as a meditation object. And if you pay attention to it and pick it out regularly, some people dismiss it as tinnitus. Others only sense it at first when they're calm. I began to pick it up when I was in my calmer states of, breath meditation. But if you pay attention to it, you begin to notice it all the time. And Ajahn Amaro can hear it over power tools. Ajahn Sumedho wakes up to it, goes to sleep to it. Ajahn Chunda, once one of my teachers and companions in the Holy Life once asked Ajahn Sumedho about it, and he responded that it sounded a lot like Ajahn Sumedho was talking about a lover. Jason Bartlett compares it to the alarm clock of the unconditioned. So it actually has a lot of parallels in other traditions, which I didn't know. So it corresponds to the Shurangama sound, the emptiness sound, and there's other references to it. But basically, it's a very constant sound, and it's brightening and very reliably there. Additionally, it's nice for Westerners or modern people because we just tend to crush our meditation objects with our will, and you can't do that with the sound. It requires a certain degree of receptivity. So there's a booklet online called Inner Listening by Ajahn Amaro. You can just Google it, it's for free. And it details a bit more about the sound, but it's an extremely powerful meditation object. I've heard it compared to the auditory equivalent of the perception of light. It's very powerful. We have time for another question, maybe two. Yeah.
You talked about lay people taking a Sabbath. How often, other than taking the 8 precepts, what does that look like?
So the question is, I spoke briefly about lay people taking a Sabbath, and the question is, what does that look like apart from taking the 8 precepts, and how often? So Ajahn Chah would sometimes admonish the villagers by saying, the Buddha only asked for 4 days a month. You have to give him 4 days. If you can't give him that, just give him 2 days. The other 20 or the other 30 are yours, all right? Or the other 29. I don't know. In Thailand, it's usually on what they call Wanpra, and that's the quarter, full, and new moon days, about once a week. But I'd say in the West, it is usually most fruitfully tacked onto a weekday that you have free, like Sunday. And once every 2 weeks is sort of, those are the noon and full moon days, so those are the big days. But I'd say once a week is wonderful if you can do it. It's a time-tested ritual, which the Bible says, God himself laid down. So, if we believed in that text in the same way. And the Buddha said that one should take on the 8 precepts. So yes, like I said, that would include turning off entertainment. I find that you do what you can living in circumstances. Like it might, mean getting together with a good spiritual friend for a time. It doesn't have to be some completely brutal ascetic day. It can just be a time when you do devote more time to practice, to reading a bit of Dhamma, to listening to talks. And if you can't really find a place for it every week, then at least maybe trying to lump a few into the places where you can find it. So maybe once a month you can step away for a 3-day weekend and go to a monastery, or something like that. But I think having that reference point every week is very helpful. And if you want to dress in white and do a bit of chanting, memorize some Dhamma, I think all the props can go a long way. The other precept there is the 8th is to avoid higher luxurious sleeping places. So little reminders, just like lying, sleeping on the ground to stay awake more. At Abhayagiri, during the Wanpra, they'll, this Sabbath day, they'll stay up late into the night and meditate, usually until about 3 a.m. And Luang Prapasano's, 70 plus years old, and he'll be there sitting, straight up the whole time. Well, much of the time. They do try to bribe everyone to stay up that late by giving them chocolate at midnight, so you can reward yourself with something too. It's a treat at Abhayagiri.